Okay, so we've made it to Brooklyn Heights. We are starting in the noisier area of Brooklyn Heights, and then we're going to move to the quieter area, hopefully. But we are starting at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, or the former Brooklyn Academy of Music, now the Orange Theory Fitness and Flushing Bank.
Yeah.
From the Pursuit of Freedom tour, we learned that we are standing in the middle of what was once the Brooklyn Academy of Music's Great Hall. The hall, which took up almost half the block, was Brooklyn's premier venue for concerts, lectures, and rallies. On May 15th, 1863, as the Civil War raged, Frederick Douglass spoke to a packed audience here. His talk was entitled, "What Should Be Done with the Negro?" He argued that the only just solution was for African Americans to become full and free American citizens, with all of the rights and privileges enjoyed by whites. His speech, often interrupted with applause, was very well received.
Yeah, which is very cool. Yeah, we don't know for certain exactly the details of the Academy of Music, if it moved or if it went away and then came back in the other location, but it's not the Brooklyn Academy of Music that I know of, you know.
The BAM, which we all
Yeah.
refer to as BAM,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's associated, if it's been around that long, or if it's a new one, but a lot of the buildings around here seem to be pretty old. We were noticing the Chipotle has a bunch of really cool Art Deco sort of style. The bank, a cathedral down the way too.
Yeah. And then as far as the particular content of what you just read, you know, Frederick Douglass's speech demanding for equal rights and privileges of all African American citizens, it's, you know, it's hard to imagine what that would have been like hearing that back then. You know, it's like the way that it's framed in that description is almost as if that there was a, you know, rational debate that was happening about that issue, you know?
Sure.
And while there was surely debate happening, it was not, you know, rational in any way, you know?
Right. I also wonder, it wasn't clear in this description, but I wonder who the audience was.
Right.
For that speech.
Well, it was in the 1860s, correct? So it was abolitionists, and I mean, we are in the North, so perhaps Northern people that are, you know, interested in the Union more than they might be interested in anti-slavery things, you know.
Sure. I guess I'm curious if it was an audience comprised mostly of people of color or of white abolitionists, or, you know, both, or I don't know. I would be curious. I mean, obviously I love that his speech was often interrupted with applause.
Right. We almost skipped over one spot here. It's a boarding house, I believe.
Yes, that we
Remsen
referenced
Street.
earlier.
Yeah.
We are on Remsen and Clinton. And there was once a fashionable boarding house that belonged to Elizabeth Gloucester. Gloucester and her husband, Reverend James Gloucester, founder of Siloam Presbyterian Church, were leaders of the anti-slavery movement. They were radical abolitionists and donated money to John Brown to raid Harper's Ferry in Virginia. They also contributed money to build Siloam, sorry, I don't know how to say that, Presbyterian Church, and to African American institutions such as the Colored Orphan Asylum. Elizabeth was a skilled financial investor, especially in real estate, and she died with assets worth more than $2 million in today's money.
Wow.
Yeah, that's impressive.
It is. So yeah, I mean, obviously none of these buildings look like that's what it is, but.
No. Yeah, and it's unclear to me exactly what corner it was, but it generally in this area.
Yeah.
That John Brown character, we spoke about him a little bit earlier, but that's an interesting person to me. I didn't know that history before this week.
Yeah.
And I guess what I've learned is that he was someone that was anti-slavery, and he was a preacher.
Yeah.
Which I guess I often associate church people with like pacifism, but he was actually frustrated with the pacifists in the abolitionist movement, and he wanted to sort of, I guess, like get some momentum, I guess is what his reasoning was, but he ended up being a really violent abolitionist, and that was the raid on Harper's Ferry, right? He ended up killing people, and killing people that were pro-slavery, which I guess we also had a civil war where this was happening, and I don't know. I don't really know how much more to say about it because, like I said, I just am learning about it this week.
Right.
But it really feels complicated in my mind because I think I would probably be a pacifist if I, I'm not interested in violence and physical violence against other people, even if they are doing violent acts themselves. Like I don't think that violence solves violence personally. That's not my methodology. But I don't know. I don't know that I can necessarily judge this person either. It seems like a lot of good came out of it, and also he seems to have been associated with people that weren't violent themselves.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's like different time or just more than I can really speak to right now.
Yeah.
I think we're at another location.
We've encountered our next stop here.
Yeah, so this church that takes up about half the block here and half the block over there, it's huge. This is currently not the Church of the Pilgrims, but it was the Church of the Pilgrims. It's currently Our Lady of Lebanon Maronite Cathedral.
Yeah.
In 1844, Henry C. Bowen, a New England transplant, founded the Church of the Pilgrims. Reverend Richard Salter Storrs, the church's pastor, spoke frequently to his congregation about the sin of slavery. Storrs was also prominent at the Long Island Historical Society, which is now the Brooklyn Historical Society, which actually is now part of the Brooklyn Library, that was founded in 1863.
Yeah. It's a very impressive structure.
Yeah. I wonder how old these carvings on the door are.
Yeah,
if
I
those
don't know.
They're really cool.
Well, yeah, now it's a Catholic church, established as a cathedral by Pope Paul VI.
And we heard about, when we were walking by here pre-recording, I said to Mike, oh, there's another Pope Paul was here as well. He told me that it was a different Pope Paul.
Pope John Paul II versus Pope Paul VI. Yeah.
Pope Paul VI was after Pope Paul II? Pope John
No,
Paul?
he was before.
Interesting. Middle name.
If my
changes
papal
things.
history serves me correctly, I believe there was a pope right prior to John Paul II, whether or not it was that pope or not, but he died. He didn't last very long.
Oh.
And John Paul II was kind of an unexpected pope.
Oh.
So yeah. It's not surprising given the historical context, but it is something that strikes me about this tour is how much churches play a role in all of this. It's a spot for people to congregate, as a spot for platforms to be communicated, both the platforms of the church and the platforms of visiting speakers. And as we've heard already a little bit, platforms for ideas that we in contemporary times would consider both virtuous and damnable.
Respectively, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does make a lot of sense in the, like you said, in the historical context, both of this specific walk, that, churches serve as a sanctuary.
Yeah.
But also just in general, that churches were meeting places when, like today, I don't know numbers or percentages or data or anything, but I think that back then churches were, like, the majority of the population was involved in some way, right?
Yeah.
It was a major social
Absolutely.
Aspect.
We've got another one coming up right here, this corner.
Right. So here we are.
I believe it's the residence or the corner where the Tappans lived.
Yeah, so Louis and Sarah Tappan's home was 86 Pierpont Street.
86. Let's see. I don't know if it's this one or not. If it is, good on them.
This one right here.
Oh, it's this one?
Yeah.
Is it where it stood, or is it the original?
This is 86.
Yeah.
So I'm actually not.
It doesn't look like
it
the
doesn't
States,
seem original.
No.
Louis Tappan was a successful Manhattan merchant, religious reformer, and ardent abolitionist. He worked closely with his brother Arthur, another Brooklyn Heights resident, in these efforts. Louis founded a mixed congregation church in Manhattan called the Chatham Street Chapel. Both the church and his home were attacked during the anti-abolition riots of 1834. His furniture and other personal belongings taken out into the street and burned.
Wow.
Tappan moved to Brooklyn Heights in the 1840s, where he lived until his death in 1873. At least one fugitive, a 14-year-old Anne Maria Weems, sought refuge here on her journey from slavery to freedom. Tappan's wife, Sarah, was also an active abolitionist. Their daughter, Lucy Maria, married Henry C. Bowen, whose home we will visit shortly.
Yeah.
Another daughter, Juliana, was an officer in the Ladies' New York Anti-Slavery Society.
Yeah.
So a whole family of abolitionists in the anti-slavery movement.
Yeah. And that section about having all your possessions removed into the street and burned, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine.
Now, something I don't know if we've called out or not, but something that's throughout the tour of all 5 locations is reference the idea of the 1863 draft riots.
Yeah.
Which took place as a consequence of poor people being conscripted into the army.
Right.
And basically the class tier above, African Americans, took out their frustration on them because they were falsely under the impression, or not, basically blame them for the war because slavery was a component of why the war was happening.
Right.
and a lot of people died.
Yeah.
And Brooklyn became a place where people fled in order to not be, mobbed.
Right. If I am remembering correctly, and correct me if I'm mixing things up, but a lot of the draft riots happened up in northern Manhattan.
I'm not. I think it was kind of all over the city. I'm not entirely sure. It didn't cover that aspect in the tour guide this week, so I'm relying on information that's older in my head.
Yeah, no,
But it
did
did happen in both rich areas because people were disgruntled with the rich because they could afford to.
Because they could pay their way out of the service.
Yeah.
Right.
As well as areas like the Five Points and Chinatown and places where there was, it was poorer. We're on Hicks now. I don't know if I think we still got a block to go before I think we reach Henry Bowen's house. But we're getting into the comparatively quieter part of town.
Right. Yeah, so Henry Bowen's house will be on Clark and Hicks Street.
Yeah.
We don't know the exact address.
It's funny now, unrelated to the tour, having spent a month walking in the Bronx, and we had kind of switched to doing this format every episode rather than sitting down.
Right.
Which has been a lot of fun. The reason we haven't been doing this format all year is because the streets of New York are pretty noisy.
Right.
And this is our first week where we've really encountered car traffic after going through Ferry Point Park and the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens and
right, we've stuck
Van Cortlandt
to mostly,
and Pelham Bay.
Yeah, these quiet areas where there's not the constant noise of traffic.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah. But even an area like this still has its fair share of noise. Look at these homes. They're very nice here.
Yeah. Those feel older to me, but like not as old as what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So this was actually on the tour as well. This is the Mansion House Hotel. This apartment building stands over the site of the Mansion House Hotel, a popular lodging place for travelers. In 1842, Brooklyn police arrested Edward Saxton here after he was accused of being a fugitive from Mobile, Alabama. Saxton did not receive a trial and was sent to a Baltimore jail where he was presumably sold into slavery.
Yeah.
So that was part of the Fugitive Slave Act.
That's right, which was a huge point of contention, considered to be one of the least respected federal laws in the history of the United States.
Yeah. And basically what it said was that if you had, it was mostly people, I guess, in the South that had slaves that escaped and fled to the North. And if that was something that had happened to you, you could use this Fugitive Slave Act to send someone or go yourself, I guess, or send some sort of like law enforcement to retrieve the person that had escaped and bring them back. And that was something that happened, I believe, after a fairly significant time of the North being like a free area where if you could make it here, you were safe.
Yeah.
And obviously, obviously it created a lot of problems. There wasn't the sort of like identification system that we have now for people, and also it was really it was while slavery was still a thing, so the treatment of people wasn't nearly, you know, the same as what we have now. And so there was a lot of mistaken identity and bringing people that, I mean, you know, not that it was okay to be recapturing people to begin with, but then it was a whole nother layer of capturing people that were never even slaves to begin with.
Right.
So just many layers of like really horrific things that our government here was allowing, and not only allowing, but like encouraging by creating this law.
Yeah. It was just another layer of absurdity to the whole situation of trying to consider people property.
Yeah. So here we are at, it's unclear exactly where, but one of these buildings would have previously, or would be on the spot that previously would have been Henry C. Bowen's home. Henry C. Bowen was a wealthy silk and dry goods merchant, was one of the founders of Plymouth Church, which we just saw down the street. Bowen was the son-in-law of Louis Tappan, another well-known abolitionist who resided in Brooklyn Heights. We just spoke about him. In 1848, Bowen and 3 others founded The Independent, which was a publication designed to promote the Congressional Church's anti-slavery stance.
Yeah.
You know, that also makes me just think about like the distance that people were living in, or this, you know, the space of community. We just walked by the father-in-law's home of a guy who lived right here, and the church that they attended was in between the whole, like it's all within
Right.
a 3-block area.
Yeah.
Seems to be a full community of people.
Yeah, very different than, well, not necessarily always
I
different
mean,
than
some
today.
people live like
but
that today still, but not quite as much.
There's the potential with trains and planes and automobiles to live further away from each other.
Right.
You can see now in the distance we're getting closer to the promenade and the water. I think we make a left, or right here rather. Yeah. Really impressive building right here.
Wow. I think it's an apartment building
Yeah.
for fancies.
There's a set of 3 or 4 streets right here that are named after fruit.
Yes. I like that.
Yeah. Do you want to read about this next one as we walk by it?
Yes, so
70 Willow Street.
70 Willow Street is Adrien Van Cinderen's home. Van Cinderen was a respected and wealthy businessman and financier. He built this house in 1839. It was one of the oldest surviving houses in Brooklyn Heights. In 1831, Van Cinderen was made the head of the Brooklyn American Colonization Society. The organization attracted some of the city's most known and influential men. They proposed sending free people of color to colonies in Africa. Ironically, Van Cinderen was the employer of one of Brooklyn's most effective and articulate Black abolitionist leaders, James Pennington, who worked as his coach driver. FYI, this house is best known as the Brooklyn home of writer Truman Capote, who had a basement apartment here between 1955 and 1965, which is the time he wrote In Cold Blood.
Yeah.
So the Colonization Society is what we referenced earlier when we spoke about the AntiColonization Society.
That's right. And the idea there was to move African Americans away so that they would not spoil the American society.
Right. And James Pennington, who they said ironically, Van Cinderen was the employer of James Pennington. I guess it's ironic because what I've really just learned again from that play that we referenced earlier that was put on at Irondale, along with this project, you see James Pennington, the character, explained a bit, and he, if my memory serves me correctly, he was someone that escaped slavery as a young boy and came up north and became a writer, and he was educated at some of the more prestigious colleges, and he wrote books on about the abolitionist movement and was really like an influence on encouraging people to join the anti-slavery and abolitionist movement.
Right. Yeah, that was my understanding based on the play as well. And yeah, it's wild to think that the two of them coexisted in the same space. Employer, employee, as well as, and then having separate passions but still maintaining that relationship.
Right. And not only just separate passions, but like different, I don't know if they're necessarily opposite views, but definitely not views that are alike.
Right.
And about a concept that directly would affect Pennington's life, in like drastic ways.
Yeah.
So here we are at
our final stop in the Brooklyn Heights section.
Right, and it is Plymouth Church.
Yeah.
This is 57 Orange Street. Plymouth Church was founded in 1847, and Henry Ward Beecher, one of the most famous abolitionists in the country, was its first minister. From the pulpit of this church, the fiery and controversial minister condemned the institution of slavery and those who practiced it. The church was built in the amphitheater style to accommodate the crowds who came to hear him. The church was built in the amphitheater style to accommodate the crowds who came to hear him. People flocked from Manhattan in such large numbers that the Fulton Ferry was apparently nicknamed Beecher's Boats. Beecher also conducted auctions, raising funds to free enslaved girls. Reminiscent of slave auctions, they whipped up frenzied outrage and generated significant donations. Under Beecher's direction, the church gained a national reputation as a bastion of abolitionism. So those auctions that they speak of, it was I still don't completely understand. We read about it, we watched in the play they show it, but I guess it was like a fake auction. It was kind of just like a dramatized auction that would be happening while ushers were passing around baskets at the church collecting money.
Right.
And then it was just unclear to me, like, if they counted up the money and that was part of the auctioning thing, or if people were, when they yelled out, was that how much they were willing to donate?
Right.
It was unclear to me, like, exactly what the point of, like, doing it like that was, other than because it was something that people were familiar with.
Right.
Of course, like in today's society, that would be abhorrent. Like, no,
Yeah.
people would be insanely offended and
Yeah.
upset. And I think we would know not to do that. And it sounds like even then people were, it says it was controversial. I think some people got really excited about it. It clearly did raise money, but then it seems like a lot of people were not into his methods.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It does, strike a contemporary mind as problematic. But they were able to raise money. This is also a location where Abraham Lincoln worshipped twice. And he worshipped here before he accepted the nomination of the Republican Party.
Right. And there's a little,
Yeah.
I don't know what you call that, sketch.
A relief,
metal
maybe.
sketch, yeah. And also Harriet Beecher Stowe.
That was
right, is related
That
to...
was Henry Ward Beecher's sister. And she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. So lots of history here. Also a piece of Plymouth Rock is here.
underneath the church.
Is that the case?
I think that's what I read the other day.
Yeah.
So this concludes our Brooklyn Heights walk.
Yeah. We have one more spot to check out, and that is the Weeksville Heritage Center. Time flash.
See you there.